Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia Politics. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and tonight we are doing the second time that I've got Skype, and it's with the same person, David Toscano, who is coming to us from Charlottesville. You will remember David. He is the minority leader of the House of Delegates in Virginia. He represents the 57th District, which is down in parts of Albemarle County and Charlottesville. He went to the Colgate University in New York. He got his bachelor's degree there in 1968. He has a PhD from Boston College, although I don't think I'm required to call him Dr. Toscano. He hasn't told me that yet. And he has a JD from UVA here in Virginia in 1986. Joining me in the studio is Delegate Mark Sickles. He is with the 43rd District here in Fairfax County. He has been with us before, and he comes back because he is a great guest. He has been in the House of Delegates since 2004. He has a BS from Clemson University and 2 master's degrees from Georgia Tech. So he is a Southern boy through and through, was born and raised in Arlington County, but had the wisdom to move to Fairfax. So we are glad he is here with us as well. So welcome to both of them. Now, David's coming in from Skype, so hopefully they're going to put David up on the screen. Otherwise, we'll be talking and David will talk and nobody will get to see him. There he is. Hey, David.
Hey, great to be with you tonight.
Absolutely. Glad you could make it. The wonders of Skype and technology. Well, I wanted to talk first about the federal elections, mainly because it's such great news for us here in Virginia that every opportunity I have to talk about it, I do talk about it. But partly because this was the first election in Virginia under the new voter ID laws. And there was a lot of controversy over what effect that would have. I know I read someplace that the governor spent over $2 million sending people out their voter ID cards. I know we here in Fairfax County did, I think it was 4 or 5 public service announcements in multiple languages about what had to be brought to the polls. We had grip cards. We were going to multicultural festivals, doing all kinds of stuff. In Fairfax County, only 15 provisional ballots were caused by lack of the proper ID. Half of them got counted. But what was it like in the rest of the state? Was this an issue in the rest of the state or no?
Well, Bettina, I don't think there was as much problem as people thought there might be, partly because there was so much attention paid to it around the country. It was in the national media. And people just made sure they got their back up and said, you're not going to take my vote away. And they came out to vote. Now, you might recall our bill in Virginia was not nearly as bad as what passed in other states, and we even expanded the number of IDs that were legitimately taken to identify who you are. So it wasn't as bad as it might have been. Of course, the provisional ballot part was what we changed in Virginia anyway, and how instead of doing an affidavit swearing who you are, right, when you didn't have an ID, now you had to cast a provisional ballot, which under Virginia law doesn't have to be counted.
Well, what is that? Because you mentioned that, and I didn't realize that. I know a lot of them don't get counted, but there's what is the law on that?
Well, I know that when we've had voters that go to a precinct and they've been registered at the wrong precinct and they send them back, we've had one voter that went back and forth 4 times, and her original precinct was where she should have voted. If she had voted provisionally on either one, maybe or maybe not her vote had been counted. Mm-hmm. So I think that one of the big issues we have is that people don't know exactly what the law is, and even our election judges and the people running in the precincts, most of these are volunteers. They're all volunteers essentially, right, for what we pay them. And it's hard to remember all the rules because there's so many of them. And this year we need to clear up things, mm-hmm, and try to get our DMV working better with the Board of Elections. And there's just a lot of work to do. We need to have more machines in the precincts themselves. We need to go, in my opinion, to paper ballots even more in the Scantron machines, which we've decided are better because you can do a recount, right, and you can move more people through the precinct faster. So there's a lot of things we need to look at before the next big election, And of course, next year we're going to elect a new governor, which is the most important position in the United States, of course, the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
That's right.
And we as Democrats need to make sure that we have as close a turnout or as high a turnout as possible to match this year's for that race. And so we want to make sure that everybody who's eligible to vote and should come out again, or we want them to come out again next year, just 11 months from now.
Well, there is I read someplace there's a law in Virginia, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong on this, where we can't buy any more of those electronic touch screen televisions. That's how I think of them. Voting machines. Is that right? We can't actually do that. So the machines we have to get are the Scantrons to have people vote on paper.
Yeah, there was a study done a couple years ago. It went into all the different kinds of machines, and there are a lot of people scared that the electronic machines can be hacked into. Maybe legitimately, maybe not legitimately scared, but you can't get a recount on an electrical machine or a computer type machine. You can do that if you have a paper ballot where you can fill in the little ovals.
It's like being in high school again.
Yes, and stick it through the machine. And we can move more people, as I mentioned earlier, through the precinct, because when you have the constitutional amendments like we had this year and the bond questions, and people want to read them, standing in front of the electronic machine takes up more time, when they can take all the time they need to at their desk in their privacy screens, filling in those ovals how they want to, and then voting itself is just very quick.
Is there any problem, or are we going to do anything about these electronic poll books? I know in my precinct, when I was inside, at one point they went down.
Yeah.
And there was, I was surprised to learn there was no paper backup at the precinct.
There's supposed to be paper backup.
Well, they didn't seem to have any in my precinct, because everybody sort of got flustered and said, what are we going to do? And then eventually the machines all came back up again. They didn't stay down long, but it was enough for me to say, and what are we doing now? Because people were there were long lines.
Well, I've asked that question, and I was told they're supposed to have paper backup. We have just moved into these electronic poll books, and that is an advance, because you don't have to wait in the M through Z line anymore. You can go to any person and they can look you up. And it's just much more accurate. We can make sure the data is in there in a way that, that everyone can see.
I did notice when I was inside at the precinct that anybody who had an apostrophe in their name, or they had a hyphenated name, there were multiple searches on this electronic database as they tried to find out where were they in the books. Yeah.
Well, one thing that the electronic poll book has allowed us to do is move up the deadline to register to vote. We used to be 1 month out. I carried a bill a couple years ago that moved it to 3 weeks. With the electronic poll books, once we get the kinks out of them, they start working, we should be able to register closer and closer to Election Day. I mean, other states have same-day registration, so we should be able to get there, not the same day necessarily in this General Assembly, but move closer to Election Day to help people get enfranchised.
Now, David, I wanted to bring you in on this conversation because you're down in Charlottesville. Obviously, UVA is a massive number of folks. Were there problems down there with your students voting? Any other kinds of issues? We had big lines up here in some of our precincts. How was it down in your part of the state?
Well, Bettina, it wasn't really much of a problem down here. We had big lines early in the day. People, I think, were concerned about what was going to happen later in the day. So they came out early. But I think, I hope your viewers take a look at this from the 30,000 foot level and realize that there was a concerted effort across the country to suppress the vote. And it started very early. And you notice that much of the efforts at suppression occurred in the southern states where people were concerned about, especially in the southern swing states where they were concerned about African Americans coming out to vote for Obama. And they put in all these measures to try to suppress the vote, just like they did attempt to do in Virginia. They dressed it up along the argument that there was supposedly a lot of fraud in the system. Well, all the studies indicated there wasn't much fraud at all, but we nonetheless put these new laws on the books to make it more difficult for people to vote. In reality, we should be making it easier for people to vote, and I think part of the Democratic agenda in the upcoming session is to try to make it easier for people to vote. Irony, of course, is that Governor McDonnell, when he saw this bill coming through the legislature, I think he got a little bit embarrassed. And as a result, they spent how many millions of dollars sending out voter ID cards to every voter. So ironically, even though the effort at the beginning was an effort to suppress the vote, once they started sending out these ID cards, people began to realize, yeah, I need to remember to go to vote, and all I need to do is to take that card. So in some ways, it became easier at the end than we thought it was going to be at the beginning when these bills were passed.
Well, I saw, David, in the paper just the other day that there is I believe is a delegate, Cole, who apparently doesn't want you to be able to go in with your utility bill, your bank statement, things like that, and wants to have a bill that starts to more limit what your the idea is that you can use. And he was quoted as saying his personal preference is for photo ID, which I think is where a lot of people got into trouble, a lot of states got into trouble. What's your sense, David, of whether that kind of legislation is actually going to get any traction this year?
Well, I didn't hear the end of your question, but I think you were asking me, do I think this bill has a chance of passing?
Right.
I think it probably does have a chance of passing. Part of what I think the Republicans have got to figure out for this legislative session is whether they're going to try to overreach like they did last legislative session. How many voter suppression bills did we consider last year? How many gun bills did we consider last year? How many bills that were designed to put restraints on women's ability to exercise their rights in the reproductive health field? The Republicans are going to have to make a decision early on whether they want the whole General Assembly to see these bills and consider passing them. And if they make the same decision as they made last session, we're going to see a whole host of these things. I think Delegate Cole's bill would have a reasonable chance of getting passed out of the House of Delegates. I'm not so sure it could pass the Senate, but I think it could get out of the House of Delegates. I don't know, maybe, Mark, you have a different view, but that's my take on it right now.
I really don't know yet, David, but Mark Cole is the chairman of the Privileges and Elections Committee, which handles this kind of legislation. I don't know if he has a perfect track record on getting all his bills passed, but he's in a good position to do it.
Well, we're going to take our break here. We can hear the music in the studio, so I want you to stay with us because we will be back with David Toscano and Mark Sickles to talk some more about what we think is going to happen in the Virginia General Assembly this year. Stay with us.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me. There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, Hope is just a phone call away. 1-800.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host of Inside Scoop, Virginia Politics. And with me tonight is Delegate Mark Sickles and Delegate David Toscano, coming to us via Skype from Charlottesville. And I want to talk about issues that maybe you guys are going to be paying particular attention to in this particular session. Mark, I think you're you're in Northern Virginia. You have to be concerned about transportation. Is that something that'll be high on your list again this year?
We try to work on it every year. As you recall, in 2007, we passed a major bill, 3202. It was a speaker's bill, but the guts of the bill was struck down by the Virginia Supreme Court, and we have not revisited it to have a bill that has that amount of substance to it and revenue in it. And we have been trying to offer a constitutional version of that, particularly Delegate Watts, but it's had a hard time getting out of committee.
So what's coming up? Because I read there's a Senator Watkins, a Republican Senator Watkins, who has a proposal that he apparently has presented in the Senate. I don't know if you guys have seen the reports on this, where the gas tax would raise to another to 5%, so it would be 14 cents a gallon increase. God, I hope it is like phased in, because that's huge. Lower income taxes for the lower brackets. He would eliminate some tax credits and exemptions. He wants to assess a flat fee on electric car and hybrid cars, because obviously they don't use as much gas, even though they're on the roads. The majority, I guess he's actually the minority leader in the Senate, Dick Saslaw. It's hard to say when you get 2020 who's who, but I think he's technically considered the minority.
Dick thinks he's the majority.
He thinks he's the majority. He says, he was quoted some places saying he thought that was a good idea.
Yeah.
Governor McDonnell was recently quoted saying, well, he's thinking about indexing the gas tax to inflation, but he also likes tolls a lot, as what I read. And the Washington Post the other day ran an editorial saying to Governor McDonnell, hey, this is your last year. You've got no legacy. You might want to make fixing this transportation your legacy. So does any of that really have a chance? I mean, this is raising revenue, and you got Republicans in charge.
Well, I'll start and let David clean up, but Senator Watkins is a very serious senator. He's a great guy. He's one of the, I guess you would call him a moderate these days.
They still exist?
Yeah, well,
it's amazing. Wow.
He does set himself apart on a couple votes, and I think this is a serious proposal. I have not studied it. I think that we ought to take a really good look at it, and if it can get out of the Senate, that would put a lot of pressure on the House to act and get that bill into conference and maybe do something that has real substance.
Now, David, let me ask you this. In Virginia, I mean, we all are real familiar up in Northern Virginia with the complete dysfunction in the federal government, where the Senate is considered more moderate and the House of Representatives are a bunch of wild-eyed, crazy Tea Party people. I mean, that's kind of the characterization, the caricature. Is that the way it is? I mean, if some moderate kind of plan came out of the Senate in Virginia, could it survive the House of Delegates?
Well, you know, at some point it has to survive the House of Delegates, because the problem is so acute that if people don't start doing something about it, it's going to hurt us tremendously down the road. You know, if we're going to continue to compete in the global economy, if we're going to have the transportation system that we need to have to compete, to take advantage of our ports, to get our goods to market, and also to have people be able to deliver their kids to school on time, to various events on time, we're going to have to put more money in the pot. That's to maintain our roads, to maintain our bridges, and to build new roads where we need it, especially in Northern Virginia and in Hampton Roads. The problem we've got right now is the House of Delegates is composed of pretty conservative representatives, many of whom have taken the pledge authored by a non-Virginian, Grover Norquist, that they will never raise revenue under any circumstance. And so we got this situation where somebody who doesn't even live in Virginia is making the decisions for those people who live in Virginia. And until we change that dynamic, we're not going to get anything through the House of Delegates, it seems to me. But we know the problem is acute. We know we need about $1 billion more a year. Senator Watkins' proposal is a serious proposal. You have to look at it very seriously. It would raise perhaps not as much money as people would like, but it will raise substantial amounts of money. If indexing is considered Governor McDonnell's main claim to fame in this General Assembly session, it isn't much of a legacy bill because it doesn't raise all that much money. It will do things over the long term to help, but it doesn't raise the kind of money we need to have right now to help solve the problems with maintenance and new construction in Virginia.
Well, we don't even really have, as I read this, we don't really even have money for construction. All the money is getting sucked into just maintenance to try and keep our roads and bridges to still be passable and safe. So you really do need a ton more money than what just for maintenance type stuff. I do wonder, speaking of Grover Norquist, who I always say every time someone mentions his name, you know he's a lobbyist, because people are taking this pledge of his. He's a lobbyist, okay? It's phenomenal.
Bettina,
but I noted that in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate, some people are starting to say, I know I signed that, but I'm not going to stick with it because times have changed and things are different. Mark, do you think there might be any wiggle room for the Republicans in Virginia?
Well, Bettina, we haven't been in Richmond since March, so the election's taken place since then. The American people have spoken, Virginians have spoken about what kind of government they want. I think that maybe some sense will come to people. We have not raised the tax since 1986. It's a per gallon tax on gasoline. In 1986, it was raised from 15 to 17.5 cents a gallon. It hasn't changed since. Nobody ever thought that that was the last increase we'd ever have for it. This will be the 27th year working off the other tax that we passed that year, which was a half cent on the sales tax, which has been keeping our program going. And that money, which was supposed to be used for construction, is used for maintenance, as you were saying. So we really need to examine ourselves. Do we want infrastructure to have our businesses be able to run efficiently into the future, or we want to have this threat eat us up? And we were known as a pro-business state, yet we're allowing this to happen to ourselves for really no good reason. Now, there are some good things happening, and we're getting the most, maybe some people say too much, out of the toll road. This project outside the door here on the Beltway Express lanes could be very, very popular. I think it will be popular when people get used to it. It just opened up for our viewers if you're out of the area, and people are getting used to it. And it was a way to make the most out of a certain amount of a certain footprint without taking too many houses and getting a transit option in the Beltway for the first time. But tolls don't work everywhere, and the toll the governor has recommended for I-95 in Emporia is highly unpopular. It's unpopular with all the local governments along I-95. The big job in Hampton Roads to Petersburg, 460, a road that the business community doesn't even wants its money spent other places, but the administration oftentimes tries to pound a square peg into a round hole. And so you can't toll everything, but we need to be smart enough to do it where it works well. You know, I wanted to correct one thing I said. Senator Watkins is not a moderate. I don't want to get him in trouble. You know, Senator Watkins, I did not say that. You're a true conservative, and I'll support you or oppose you, whatever you need. So I just wanted to say I don't want to give you a bad name here.
Yeah, that you kind of like gave the bad rap to the guy. But moderate is not how you're supposed to be referred to.
Absolutely.
Bettina, yeah, David.
If I could build on something Mark said, because I think it's another interesting way to think about this problem. If we go at it as a conservative might go at it, which is to ask, are we getting our taxpayer bang for the buck? I think most people understand that the way transportation funding works in Virginia, we put $1 on the table, and then we get a certain number of dollars from the federal government. I think it's like 5 to 1. So, and that's to build roads. We put that $1 on the table using our Virginia gas tax. We get the $5 back using the tax that we pay to the federal government every time we put gas in our car. It's like 18.5 cents per gallon. Right now, that money is flowing to the federal government, And if we don't use our Virginia tax dollars to get some of that money back, some of our money to invest in our roads, then that money is going to go to Montana, New York, Wyoming, Maine, other states. That is our money. That's taxpayer money that's being generated from Virginians that is going to build roads in New York and Montana. We forget about that sometimes, but we need to remember, if we're going to be stewards of the taxpayer money, we need to figure out a way to get some of that taxpayer money back into Virginia. And we're not doing it right now.
A 5-to-1 return by anybody's book is good. So you don't really want to give up that kind of money.
No. We haven't had to yet, but it's we're right on the precipice of that.
Well, hopefully McDonnell will decide that he does actually want some kind of a legacy, and it isn't just this index the gas tax, and then we'll get something substantive going on. Another issue that I wanted to raise, because it's coming up, and I'm not sure if it's going to get dissolved or resolved before you all go back into the General Assembly, but it's Obamacare is here to stay. And the state's got to make some decisions about what we're doing. Are we going to have a state exchange? Are we going to have a federal exchange? There was a whole lot of sort of chest pounding going on saying we need a Virginia state exchange because, you know, Virginia for Virginians, not some sort of, you know, conglomerate that the federal government decided. And then I started seeing people saying, well, maybe the federal is not so bad. Where do you think all that's going to play out? What's going on with that?
I'll let you take the first stab at this, Mr. Leader.
Oh, okay. I'll take a stab and then you can follow on. Bettina, there are really two issues that are before the General Assembly right now that are flowing out of the federal legislation. One is whether we create what would be called a state healthcare exchange by which consumers could compare products that insurance companies put into the marketplace and then make their decisions accordingly, and that exchange would be run by the state. Or we defer that decision and let the federal government impose an exchange from the outside. I think our view among House Democrats is that we would prefer to have Virginia in control of our destiny by having our own exchange. The governor, for whatever reason, I think largely political, has refused to embrace that position right now and actually throughout the summer and fall, because he really didn't want to get associated with Obamacare. But that decision's got to get made, and right now I think the better thing to do is to have Virginia control it.
Well, David, I'm going to cut you off because in the studio our music is starting and it's cutting you off. So we're going to start there when we come back from our break. So please stay with us. We will be back with David Toscano and Mark Sickles right after this.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer, no family history of cancer. I was 31 years old. 31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
2 words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school. And know about your kid. Find out 100 ways.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host. I have with me today Delegate Mark Sickles and Delegate David Toscano. And when we left, we were talking about Obamacare and how we were going to handle this in Virginia. And David, I want to go back to you because you were talking about the issue with the federal exchange versus the state exchange, and you got cut off a little bit at the end there as we were going to break, so I want to roll us back a little bit and pick up where you were.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, the first issue is whether we create our own exchange in Virginia or we defer to the federal government and let them impose an exchange on us. And a lot of us, Democrats in the House and in the Senate, have taken the position that we ought to have our own exchange in Virginia. The second issue has to do with the expansion of Medicaid. Under the federal law that was approved by the Supreme Court, it left the states with the option of whether or not to expand Medicaid to a larger section of the public. In Virginia, we would do this and be reimbursed the costs of the expansion from the federal government in the amount of 100% of those costs. That will decline over a period of about 10 years to 90%, I believe. So the federal government would be picking up the tab for the expansion of Medicaid. And in the process, we could assist probably 350,000 to 400,000 Virginians who don't have any source of health insurance whatsoever right now. And we could do it largely with federal dollars. It wouldn't cost Virginia very much to insure those extra people. And that's part of the reason why at least some of us support that Medicaid expansion. But those will be the two issues that we'll have to decide in this legislative session.
Well, you know, I've read about the Medicaid expansion stuff, but I keep reading these Republican comments that say, we're going to get stuck with the bill. And so we can't do this because this is going to, you know, throw the Virginia budget out of whack and, you know, we shouldn't do it. Yeah, that doesn't sound, but that's not what you're saying. You're saying we could do it with federal dollars?
Well, the way it's going to work, those new people that would be added to Medicaid would be 100% reimbursed to the state through federal money for a period of time. Now, that is going to decline over time. Right now, Medicaid is a state-federal program in which the federal government reimburses the states 50% of the cost of Medicaid. So as you can see, this new arrangement to cover this 350,000 to 400 new Virginians would be a better deal for us because most of the money, most of the costs would be picked up by the federal government.
Where do you think that's going to go, Mark?
I don't really know, but it is similar to the situation we have now where Medicaid can be cut back because of the deficit and debt problems we have. All these entitlements could be on the table. We're hoping that we don't take them from the poor who need them the most. We have 1 million Virginians that don't have regular health care now, which Obamacare is going to overcome, we hope. As David was saying, 350 to 400,000 will be on Medicaid now. I think that in the long term, we're going to save money. The Congressional Budget Office says we're going to save money. Hospitals will be paid for people that normally are uncompensated care now because they won't be walking into the emergency room without a way to pay for the services there. We have so many cross subsidies in the healthcare industry because of the uncompensated care issue. So many people don't have insurance. So I think that this program is going to take a while to straighten out all the kinks with it. There's a lot of things that are uncertain on how it's going to unfold, but it's our position as the Democratic caucus that we should develop a plan that's best for Virginia. Even though there's uncertainties out there, we say this is the way we think the exchange ought to run and send it to Washington and have them tell us why that's not good enough or approve it or not approve it. Mm-hmm. We could have been doing this a long time ago, but because of politics, we've been sitting on our hands while these deadlines have been approaching. Now, another thing I'd like to mention is the we're having a governor's race. I said that earlier.
Right.
Next year, the governor's, the nominee for the Republican Party is going to be nominated by convention sometime in late May on a weekend. And both candidates that are running for the nomination on their side oppose expanding our Medicaid program where we get 100% of our money back. We are the 7th wealthiest state in the United States. And they are saying that we are going to have our taxpayers pay for the health care for low-income people all over the United States, but not in our own backyard here. That is not sustainable position, and really, I can't believe that they're making it.
Well, and as you pointed out, we really are paying, whether it's a direct subsidy or whatever, but if someone shows up at the emergency room, they have to be treated. And so we're paying indirectly one way or the other. It seems that getting a little help from the federal government, even if it doesn't stay at 100% forever, is better than leaving all that money on the table.
Right. I mean, the reason, not to get too technical, but the reason it saves money is that there are other programs to help out hospitals and providers with this uncompensated care, which will be gone. They're going to be done away with because Medicaid will be taking over the regular health care for our citizens.
Now, have the doctors and the hospitals, I mean, it sounds like it would be a good deal for the hospitals. They're going to get reimbursed for this. Are they in favor of it, or are they staying neutral,
question.
or what are they doing?
Well, I think doctors, David, you can jump in any time, but you know, doctors have a problem with Medicare compensation now, which it's an annual issue up on the Hill to create the doc fix, and Medicare has had really only 4% inflation versus 9 or 10% in the economy as a whole. But they are not getting proper compensation, and so they're wary about adding more people in that same category. So we have to make sure that we start paying to take care of an entire patient and not paying for each particular service that they provide. I remember when my dad was alive, I had to take him back to the doctor 2 different days because he couldn't get paid for the 2 services if he didn't have a separate visit. And that is silly. I had that experience that myself. And so that's the type of thing that we need to do away with as we move into more comprehensive care for people.
Well, and David, I wanted to ask you, because one of the comments that I saw as people were talking about expanding the health care was that in Virginia we don't have enough primary care physicians. And you're down there, you've got this great university down there. Is there any plan to try and increase the number of actual primary care physicians? Because they're very hard to come by.
Well, there's a lot of work down here to try to increase those numbers. And I think if you look at a place like the University of Virginia or VCU or who provide a lot of indigent care, they're scared to death about what would happen if the state did not expand Medicaid, because right now they're getting reimbursed some of the money from the federal government for this indigent care, but that's going to go away. And unless there's another way to get people from using the emergency rooms as their primary care physician, the costs are going to continue to rise with no opportunity to get reimbursed.
What about the cost of medical school? That keeps going up. Does Virginia, I know there used to be programs, and I guess maybe there still are, where if you worked in a particular, typically rural or poor inner city place, you could get your medical degree at less of a cost. I mean, is there some notion that we could expand that or do something so that if you're dealing with these lower income folks, regardless of where they're coming from, that might help people decide this is a good deal because I'm not going to be in debt for the rest of my life?
There are some programs like that. I know they have them for nurses too, but I'm not as conversant with those as maybe I should be. Maybe Mark knows more about them. I
don't know more. I know there's a program for doctors who are willing to go and work in rural areas where there's not a lot of help, but I don't know what the extent of it is. Yeah. I think these issues are going to be in the forefront with our demographics pushing the issue. More and more of us are going to be in our elder years and are going to need care. And the healthcare industry is certainly focused on it. I hear about these issues all the time, and we're doing what we can here in Northern Virginia at the Community College Medical Campus and at George Mason, and the relationship between those 2 institutions and Marymount. and other places where there's waiting lists sometimes to get into some of their healthcare and nursing programs.
Well, hopefully we'll figure this out. Now, I thought the decision on the state versus federal exchange had to be made like next month, that they had gotten, it was supposed to be done shortly after the election, and then there was a 30-day extension. Do either of you know what happens if we miss the deadline? Do we default into a federal plan, or is there, how do we do that? This is before the General Assembly goes back into session.
Yeah.
Or is this just Governor McDonald's problem? Is this where we're coming down?
Well, there's a lot of confusion right now. I mean, the deadline was a month ago, and then they extended it. I think the federal government really doesn't want to have a face-off with the states. I think they want to try to encourage the states to put these exchanges in themselves, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why they continue to extend the deadline. There's a certain irony to this, too, here in Virginia, because for all of Governor McDonald's protestations, he's had a working group working on this thing for months, and they've done a lot of very good work. They are pretty ready to go. The governor just has to say, yeah, let's go do it now. Let's put the legislation in to do it. And there are not a whole lot of moving parts to work out here. They just, for political reasons, don't want to embrace it right now.
Yeah, our Senate colleagues decided we should have a special session, and they might have a good idea there. They called for it this past week. There's a lot of work to do in this. There may be an interim step that we may have to go through, so it's partially federal, partially state controlled, but we need to treat this as an emergency situation and not as, the politics are over now. Right. There's, even if the election results hadn't been so good, this would have been very difficult to repeal without some kind of replacement. We are not going back to the way that we provided health care in the past. We just cannot do it. We can't afford it. Small business can't afford it. More and more of our small businesses have not been able to provide health care insurance for their employees, and they don't like that. Right. They've been dropping it, and so we need to work on this regardless of how that last election took out. So that's why we're so disappointed that we're not further along down the path.
Well, I guess if everything is on your hope and expectancy that the federal election would have turned out differently, and you think somehow, as his opponent said, as Mr. Romney said, I'll repeal it the first day. I thought the man needs a civics lesson. He doesn't get to do that. That's not how this whole process works.
He needs to go see Lincoln. Go see the movie Lincoln to see how legislation is made and repealed.
We're going to talk more about how legislation gets made in Virginia when we come back, because I want to get a sense of that. I know some people need to be talking to their legislators right now. There's all kinds of bills that I hear are being introduced, maybe not introduced, failing. I have no clue. So stay with us.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry?
Yeah. No. Sam's? No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done. D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time!
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Stop! Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound?
Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, the host of Inside Scoop, Virginia Politics, and we are into our final segment with Delegate Mark Sickles and Delegate David Toscano, who's joining us via Skype from Charlottesville. And I want to talk a little bit, because we went to break, about how bills move around in Virginia. If people have something that they're concerned about now, and they want you, David, to introduce legislation on their behalf, they need to be talking to you now, right? They shouldn't be waiting until January when the session starts.
Well, hopefully they would have started talking to us in the summer, but now is certainly much better than January, because by that time it's really too late. And in this session, members of the House have a 15 bill limit. You can only introduce 15 bills. Wow. So, they have to get engaged with the process. And the way it works is, sometimes a citizen will have an idea, and the legislator will just ask Legislative Services to draft a bill, and then we file the bill, and it goes through the process. You can follow bills by going to the legislative website. Just type in Virginia General Assembly, and you'll be able to go to it, and you'll see where bills are filed, who's filing what bills, and you can even follow certain bills that you might want to follow. But, it is a process that, for us, if we introduce a bill, it starts in the House. That bill will go through a subcommittee first. Eventually, if it gets through the subcommittee, it'll get considered by a full committee. If it gets passed by a full committee, it gets to the floor of the House, and hopefully it gets passed there and over to the Senate. I'm fond of saying that when you begin this job, you have to learn how to count. You have to learn how to count to a majority in a subcommittee. You have to learn how to count to a majority in the committee. And then you got to learn how to count to 51 to get your bill out of the House of Delegates. Then it goes to the Senate, and you have to count all over again, learn how to count again. So that's kind of a nutshell of how it works.
Yeah, Bettina, I've had my bills killed at the subcommittee, the full committee, on the floor, in the Senate subcommittee, in the Senate full committee, on the Senate floor, and vetoed by the governor.
You just have such a stellar variety of things to talk about there, Mark. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Well, let me ask you this. There was last year, of course, and I do wonder, and would love to hear what your thoughts are on what effect the federal election would have on these kinds of bills. Last year, of course, the General Assembly, particularly the House of Delegates, I'm sorry to say, really was the fodder for late night comics with the transvaginal ultrasound bill, since I have one, I can say the whole thing, and the personhood bill, and all of those other kinds of things that came up. The Republicans lost women in Virginia this time. Are they going to go crazy like this again? That personhood bill got carried over. I've read Bob Marshall saying he's got other bills he wants to put in as well. I mean, are we going to look at the same thing this year? What's your sense? Nobody's going to take me up on this, huh?
Well, I'll take you up on it. It was interesting. Last year, when the governor began the session with his State of the Commonwealth address, he warned legislators to not overreach, stick on point, try to focus on the economy, on creating jobs and economic opportunity. And then it happened. They all went.
I'm not sure. I think they had even worse stuff, David. And maybe some of it was killed. I don't know. But there was enough to make us a laughingstock for the country, that's for sure.
It was just awful.
And you would like to think that maybe they learned their lesson, that this socially conservative overreach legislation backfires. You're already seeing some indication that they have learned some things. The personhood bill that was introduced last year and was voted out of the House of Delegates with substantial support from the Fairfax delegation on the Republican side, went over to the Senate, almost passed the Senate, and then they bottled it up for a year. And we just heard today that they're not going to take up that bill. So that bill is dead for the year. But you have to know that any delegate or any senator can introduce any bill. And tomorrow, one of our colleagues might reintroduce the personhood bill. And then we see whether the leadership is going to have that bill heard by a committee. They might decide not to have the bill heard at all, or they might assign it to a subcommittee that meets at 12 at midnight and never really consider the bill seriously. It's hard to know right now.
Well, they've got we all do, statewide elections coming up. And of course, Cuccinelli is one of the ones who's running in the convention to try and get the nomination to run for governor. He is notorious for being conservative and doing crazy things, like going after the climate scientist at UVA and filing his own Obamacare lawsuit and doing a whole bunch of other things, all of which he's been unsuccessful at. But it would seem that they would not want to start off the year with a General Assembly that's going crazy on those kinds of issues. It kind of sets you up badly for the statewide elections. And so I sort of am curious as to, is there any party discipline, anybody who gets to stand up and say to the folks in the House of Delegates, the Republicans in the House of Delegates, not this year. You need to behave yourself. We can't keep these women or these minorities active like they were in the Obama election. I mean, how does that work?
Well, I think they're working overtime to do just what you said, to try to keep it, the number of these bills low, if not eliminated. That's what they'd like to do, but as David said, we're 100 independently elected people and we can introduce any bill we want to. I would recommend that the public watch the Republican nominating process very closely. Watch the platform as it comes out of Richmond. See what Attorney General Cuccinelli is saying. See what Lieutenant Governor Bill Bolling is saying. I do think that November 6th was a good day for Bill Bolling because he's not as beloved by the Republican base as Ken Cuccinelli is, and his argument is basically, I'm electable and he's not. And just look what happened last year. That's my proof of it. Right. But in a convention, I don't think that the argument wins. And you will be, as you know, you read the newspapers now, and the problem with Mitt Romney was that he was not conservative enough and he was not true to those beliefs, and that's why he lost. So we're going to have that debate. We have it over and over in both parties, but particularly the Republican Party is much more interesting in this regard than we are, I think. I encourage people to pay attention to it.
Well, I want to know, because we've got about another 5 minutes to go, David, and I wanted to circle back to you about UVA, because you're down in UVA, and it seems like we went from a really bad General Assembly session to that debacle over the summer with the president of UVA. What's going on with that? I mean, they're making nice, but frankly, somebody tries to fire me, embarrasses me nationwide. Why is Helen Dragus, I guess her name is, still there?
It's David's best friend.
Ooh, she's so sorry.
Well, I think the reason that she's still there is the governor has suggested she be reappointed to the board. And that's one of the first decisions that the General Assembly will have to make right out of the box. We get a chance to approve or disapprove of the governor's appointments to various boards and commissions, and one of them is to the Board of the Visitors of UVA. And there'll be 5 appointments, one of which is Helen Dragus' reappointment. And that's something that if people have a view on that, they can weigh in with their local delegate and senator and let them know what they think. I think that those delegates and senators are not going to listen to the faculty at UVA. They're going to listen to the public to help them determine how to vote on this critical issue. Beyond that, there are issues about whether we need to reform the process by which we choose the visitors to the Board of Visitors of UVA and perhaps other institutions of higher learning. And, there'll be a number of bills proposed in that arena as well that we'll have to consider during the General Assembly session. There's little doubt that what happened in UVA was an outrage last spring, and because it was such an outrage and the alumni spoke up, Terry Sullivan was reinstated. That is very, very uncharacteristic of higher education in this country. If you fire a president, they don't come back. And the fact that the alumni from all over the Commonwealth came out and said that this was an outrage, you have to put her back, led the Board of Visitors to change their mind and reinstall her.
Well, and I want to make sure folks understand, the Board of Visitors, as I will make sure I understand, the Board of Visitors is like a Board of Directors. For whatever reason, we call them Board of Visitors. But that's kind of their oversight responsibility, right?
That's exactly right. They are the policy makers of the university, and the president and her appointments carry out the policy in conjunction with the faculty. It's like a corporation. You know, the board of directors of a corporation and the chief executive officer carries out the policy directives of the board of directors.
Well, I didn't realize that the General Assembly got an opportunity to say yay or nay on this.
Well, usually it's like a presidential appointment. We would rarely not approve a person appointed by a governor of either party. She may stand out as a different case this time because it was so unbelievable. This is going to be a case study in civics lessons in business schools forevermore, how this was handled.
Crisis management,
public relations, everything. When you're on the front page or the top story in the New York Times Magazine, you know, you've made it big.
Yeah, not the way UVA wants to make it big, that's for darn sure. So anybody who is out there who thought, well, it's done, and who despaired at seeing Helen Dragas appointed, they get one more shot. They get one more bite at the apple by getting a hold of their delegates. Now, is it just the delegates, or do the senators get a vote? Does everybody get a vote? Who votes?
Delegates and senators both get votes. This is a very unusual process where both bodies have to confirm the governor's appointments. In a lot of states, you know, the governor appoints and the Senate confirms. That's what happens in the United States government, federal government. But this is unusual how this works in Virginia.
Well, I actually didn't know about it, so we're going to have to follow that and see how that goes. Those of you who care about it, and we had lots of people on the show talking about it while it was happening, they need to sort of roll their sleeves back up, either for or against, and decide what it is they want to do. So I want to thank both of you for making time this evening to come. Mark, you here in the studio.
Yep.
David via Skype, I appreciate you taking the time. We're going to follow you guys down at the General Assembly. We'll be watching you. I actually had someone ask me if I would come down to Richmond and do the show remotely. And so maybe we'll figure out how to do that, and then we can actually interview David in person, and which would be unique. So everyone else, stay with us. Come on back and see us. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Thanks.